Hello, this video is about section 2.2, which is adding integers. So in 2.1 we learned about what integers are. Remember, they're either positive or negative or zero, and they're all counting numbers. Okay, in this section we're going to be learning about adding integers. So we're going to work on this by example, and I'll do lots of examples to make sure you get really comfortable with all the different cases. Okay, so example, add. The instructions are just add. So for problem number 1, I wanted to start by adding two integers that are positive, because that's the easiest case. So let's start by doing 5 plus 13. So these are two integers that have the same sign. So I think everyone knows how to add two integers with the same sign. You keep the sign and add. Okay, so let me write that down. To add two integers with the same sign, to add integers with the same sign, keep the sign and add. When I say add, I mean add normally. Okay, now this one is such a simple problem, most people could do it in their head, because 5 plus 13 is 18. They're both positive, so you just add and you keep the sign. Well, the sign here is plus. So this is going to give us positive 18. Okay, but this method actually works also if the integers are both negative. Okay, so if they have the same sign, in other words, if they're both positive or both negative, you just keep the sign and add normally. Okay, so example number 2. Let's do negative 13 plus negative 29. Negative 13 plus negative 29. So as you can see here, both of these numbers have the same sign because they're both negative. So what did I just say to do? Well, if they have the same sign, you keep the sign and add normally. So here the sign is negative, but we're actually going to be adding the numbers. And once it starts to get to 2 digits, some people like to write it vertically. So you could write 13 plus 29 vertically like this, and then add straight down. Other people can do this in their head. A lot of people can do this in their head, but if you can't, don't stress. So 3 plus 9 is actually 12. Then I carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 is 4. So 13 plus 29 is actually 42. But we have to keep the sign. Right? So here the sign is actually negative. So our answer is going to be negative. So it's actually going to give us negative 42. So I'll go ahead and box that. And you are allowed to use calculators in this course, but keep in mind that if you use the calculator on the computer, it's probably easier to have you decide whether it's positive or negative than have the calculator decide that. But for example, if we wanted to do this problem on the calculator, we would open up our calculator, which is right here in my start menu, and then I would type in the numbers. Now, if you try to actually type in the negative numbers, depending on your calculator, it may or may not work. But like here, there's a plus minus, and that should work. So if I do negative 13 plus negative 29, that gives me 42, but notice this thing doesn't show a minus. So that's why I would recommend that most of you just worry about the minuses on your own rather than relying on the calculator to deal with the minuses for you. So instead of doing negative 13 plus negative 29, most people would just add the numbers and keep the sign. So they would do 13 plus 29, and that gives you 42. And then we know that because they're both negative, the answer is going to be negative. But you don't have to use a calculator if you don't want to. It's just, you know, some of the longer problems, a calculator can be helpful. Okay, so let's see one more example of adding numbers with the same sign. So for this one, we're going to do negative 12 plus negative 152 plus negative 1,000. Okay? So negative 12 plus negative 152 plus negative 1,000. Now here, notice that the signs of these numbers are all the same. So they're all negative. So how do we add numbers that have the same sign? Well, we keep the sign and we add normally. So we know our answer is going to be negative, just like in the last problem. But here we have 3 numbers to add. So when you have this many numbers, either type them all into your calculator or line them up vertically. I'm going to go ahead and write it out. So what we have here is 1,000, 1,000. That's the biggest number. And then we have 152. And then the last number is 12. And notice I have these numbers lined up vertically so that we have the ones all lined up, then we have the tens lined up, then the hundreds, and then the thousands. So everything is lined up so that I can add vertically. And I know that my answer is going to be negative because all these numbers have the same sign, so we keep the sign and add. So if you wanted to, you can even write a minus down here right now. Okay, but now we're just going to go ahead and add vertically. So here we have 0 plus 2 plus 2 is 4. So we have 4 right there. And then for the tens, we have 0 plus 5 plus 1. That's 6. So we have 6 right here. And then for the hundreds, we have 0 plus 1 is 1. All right, and then for the thousands, we have 1 plus 0 plus 0 is 1. So our answer is actually going to be negative 1,164. Negative 1,164. Okay, and make sure you pay attention to the minus. If you forget to write in the minus and then you don't type it into MyMathLab, it will actually mark you wrong. So it is important whether you have a minus or a plus in your answer. Okay. All right, cool. So far we've done adding integers with the same sign, and we said as long as they have the same sign, you keep the sign and add. That's actually the easier case. The harder case is if they have opposite signs. Okay, so for example number 4 here, we're going to learn about how to add integers that have opposite signs. So let's do 112 plus negative 157. 112 plus negative 157. So how do you add these? These are the opposite signs, so you're not actually going to be keeping any sign. So to add integers with opposite signs, instead of adding, you're actually going to be subtracting. Okay? So subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. Subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. And when I say the larger number, I mean the number with larger absolute value. Okay, so if you just consider the positive version of the number, whichever number is bigger, that's what I'm calling the larger number. I just don't like to write too many words because it can get to be too much to read. But here, if we look at these numbers, which one's the larger number in terms of absolute value? Well, the first number is positive 112. The second number, if I take the absolute value, is going to be positive 157. Well, we know that 157 is larger than 112. So that means we're going to keep the sign of the negative 157. Okay, so here, this is the larger number. The negative 157 has the larger absolute value. So that means our answer is actually going to be negative. Okay? And notice I said if they have opposite signs, you have to subtract. And obviously when you're subtracting, the subtraction won't work unless you do the larger absolute value minus the smaller absolute value. Okay, so it's actually going to have to be 157 minus 112, but we keep the sign of the 157. So what's that going to look like? Well, we're going to have 157 minus 112. Okay, so we're going to subtract, but because the larger number was negative, we know our answer is going to be negative. So I go ahead and write a negative down here. Okay, and then we just subtract normally. So 7 minus 2 is 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. And 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay, but remember, if your highest place value has a 0, then you don't have to write this 0. So 1 minus 1 is 0, but we don't have to write the 0. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that 0. Okay, but what's important here is not only did we subtract, but we had to keep the sign of the larger number. So here the number with larger absolute value was the 157, and because that's negative, our answer ended up being negative. Okay, so we got negative 45. Okay, cool. So that's example number 4, adding integers with opposite signs. And we're going to do a few more examples, but I think we got some of the basics down now. Okay, so example number 5 is next. For example number 5, we're going to try adding together more integers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do, for this one we're going to do negative 49 plus positive 73 plus negative 119 plus negative 119. So negative 49 plus positive 73 plus negative 119. Now, keep in mind that when you're adding, the order doesn't matter, so you can add these in any order you'd like. Me personally, I would combine the negative 49 and the positive negative 119 first, and then at the end we'll combine those with the positive 73. Okay, so as you can see, these two numbers that I have in red here have the same sign. So what do? We actually keep the sign and add. Okay, so we keep the sign and add. So if we go ahead and combine the negative 49 and the negative 119, we're going to have, lining them up, we've got 119 plus 49. And then I have them lined up vertically, so it should be pretty straightforward to add. So we've got 9 plus 9 is 18, right here. Then I carry the 1, And then 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 4 is 6. And then for the hundreds, we have 1 plus 0 is 1. So you get 168. But keep in mind, all we did there was we combined the negative 49 and the negative 119. And because they were the same sign, we kept the sign and added. But what was the sign? Well, the sign here was negative. So I should be writing a negative 168 here. So this should be negative 168. Okay, and then how do we finish the rest of the problem? Well, all we've taken care of is the negative 49 and the negative 119. So now what do we have? We actually have negative 168 plus 73. So now we have negative 168 plus 73. Well, we still have to combine these now. But notice with these, one of them's negative and the other one's positive. So since they're opposite signs, what do? We subtract. We subtract. Okay, because one of them's positive, the other one's negative. And remember, you have to subtract. Obviously, you subtract the smaller number from the larger number, and you keep the sign of the larger number. So here we're going to see that the larger number is 168, and the smaller number is 73. So we're going to be doing 168 minus 73. But we want to keep the sign of whichever number has a larger absolute value, which here is the 168. So because the larger number is negative here, our answer is going to be negative. So we're going to have a negative answer here, and then we just subtract. So we've got 8 minus 3 is 5. 6 minus 7 we can't do because 6 is smaller than 7. So we borrow from the 1. The 1 becomes a 0. And we actually get 16 minus 7, which is 9. But then we said we kept the sign of the larger number. Well, the larger number was negative, so our answer is actually going to be negative 95. Okay, negative 95. Okay?